The year was 1346, as rain hammered against the ancient oaks of Sherwood Forest, turning the King's Road into a river of mud. A solitary figure lay crumpled in a wayside ditch. Lady Eleanor Montfort, 7 months with child and newly widowed, fought to maintain consciousness as cold rainwater soaked through her once fine woolen cloak. The betrayal that had brought her to this desperate edge between life and death had come not from an enemy, but from family. Her husband's own brother, whose hands had pushed her from the wagon with calculated precision. The taste of iron filled her mouth, warm blood mixing with the icy raindrops that streamed across her face. Eleanor's hands moved instinctively to her swollen belly, seeking reassurance that the child within still lived. A flutter of movement beneath her palms drew forth a sob of gratitude that was quickly swallowed by a spasm of pain from her twisted leg. "Philip," she gasped, the name of her brother-in-law emerging as both prayer and curse. The memory of his face, eyes averted as his hands pressed against her back, burned with terrible clarity despite the gathering darkness of her vision. The wagon had struggled through the storm-lashed forest, wooden wheels grinding helplessly against stone and slick earth. Eleanor had sat at the rear, one hand resting protectively over her unborn child, the other gripping the wooden frame as the vehicle lurched across the rutted road. "The load must be lightened if we're to make Nottingham by nightfall," Philip had called back, his voice nearly lost in a crash of thunder. "Perhaps we should seek shelter until the storm passes," Eleanor had suggested, her words barely audible above the renewed drumming of rain on canvas. Philip's laugh had held no warmth. "And risk brigands finding us in the dark?" "No, Lady Eleanor, we push forward." It happened with shocking swiftness. The wagon hit a deep furrow, tilting precariously to one side. Eleanor felt hands at her back, not steadying, but pushing, and then she was falling through open air. Her scream died in her throat as she struck the ground, pain exploding through her body as the wagon continued its journey without pause. "Help me," she whispered now to the uncaring forest, her voice a thread of sound beneath the storm's fury. The leather pouch containing her late husband's land deed remained secured at her waist, the treasure Philip had been willing to kill for, to claim the Montfort estate as his own, rather than see it pass to his brother's unborn heir. As consciousness began to fade, the ground beneath Eleanor trembled with approaching hoofbeats. Through rain-blurred eyes, she perceived a dark silhouette against the stormy sky, a mounted figure in armor, helm obscuring all features save for eyes that widened upon discovering her broken form. "God's mercy," a man's voice cut through her, fading awareness. "What devil's work is this?" Eleanor's vision darkened as the armored stranger dismounted. Her final conscious thought was of her unborn child, and a desperate prayer that this unknown knight might show more compassion than her own blood had done. Sir Gervase de Montfort tugged his sodden cloak closer as he knelt beside the woman's crumpled form. 7 years of wandering had hardened him to many sights, but the pale face framed by rain-darkened hair stirred something long dormant within his chest. Her swollen belly told a story plain enough, abandoned perhaps, or separated from traveling companions in the storm. Either way, a woman with child had no business lying half dead on the King's Road. "My lady," he called, touching her shoulder with unexpected gentleness. When she gave no response, he pressed calloused fingers to her throat, relief washing through him at the flutter of life beneath her skin. Practical concerns quickly overshadowed compassion. The jeweled brooch at her throat and fine quality of her muddy garments marked her as nobility, precisely the sort of entanglement he'd sworn to avoid. Helping such a woman would inevitably draw questions about his own identity, questions that could lead to the noose if his true name were discovered. "Ride on," a voice of caution whispered in his mind. "Her kind have never shown mercy to yours." Yet even as the thought formed, Gervase found himself lifting the unconscious woman into his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he carefully positioned her before him on his war-horse, one arm secured protectively around her waist. "The old hunting lodge lies not far," he murmured to his mount as much as to himself. "If God wills it, we'll find shelter enough there." The journey through the storm-lashed forest tested even Gervaise's considerable woodland skills. Twice the great destrier nearly lost footing on the treacherous path, and the woman stirred with pained whimpers at each jarring movement. By the time the abandoned royal hunting lodge appeared through the curtain of rain, darkness had nearly claimed the forest. The lodge stood, as he remembered, half reclaimed by nature, yet its sturdy timber walls and stone foundations still defiant, against time and weather. Gervais nudged the rotting door open with his boot, revealing a musty interior untouched since his last passage through these woods some months prior. Inside, he laid the woman gently upon his cloak, spread across the earthen floor. The rough timber roof leaked in places, but offered respite enough from the driving rain. Working with efficient movements, Gervais kindled a small fire in the long, cold hearth, the flames casting dancing shadows across the woman's pale features. As warmth gradually filled the lodge, he turned his attention to her injuries. The twisted leg concerned him most. Not broken, he judged, but badly wrenched. A gash at her temple had bled freely, though the flow had slowed to a trickle. Most worrisome was the child she carried. Gervais knew little of women's mysteries, but understood well enough that such trauma could bring labor too soon. "Who did this to you?" he wondered aloud, noting the bruising already forming on her back, marks too deliberate to be caused by mere accident. As if in response to his voice, the woman's eyelids fluttered. Brilliant blue eyes, clouded with pain, yet suddenly alert with fear, fixed upon his face. "Who are you?" she gasped, one protective hand moving instinctively to shield her belly. The dancing flames cast strange shadows across the stranger's face, turning his weathered features into a grotesque mask one moment, illuminating unexpected gentleness the next. Eleanor struggled to sit upright, pain lancing through her twisted leg and bruised back with each movement. "Be still," the man said, his voice low and rough-edged, yet lacking the cruelty she had steeled herself to expect. "Your injuries need rest." "You haven't answered my question," Eleanor persisted, forcing strength into her voice, despite the fear clawing at her throat. The leather pouch containing Thomas's land deed pressed reassuringly against her side, still secured beneath her kirtle. "Who are you, sir, that takes wounded women from the King's Road?" A ghost of a smile touched the man's lips. "One who prefers not to see them die in ditches." He turned away, attending to the meager fire. "I am called Gervais. Nothing more need concern you." The absence of title spoke volumes. Either no knight at all, or one who chose to conceal his standing. Neither boded well, yet Eleanor found herself studying him with growing curiosity. His hands, though calloused from sword work, moved with surprising delicacy as he prepared a poultice from herbs drawn from his travelling sack. His cloak, now serving as her bed, was worn but had once been fine wool. Most telling was the broadsword propped against the wall, plain-hilted but of exceptional craftsmanship. "You have skill with healing herbs," she observed, wincing as he applied the poultice to her temple. "Necessity teaches many things to a wandering man." The touch of his fingers against her skin brought unbidden memories of Thomas, his gentle hands cupping her face on their wedding day, his fingers intertwined with hers as fever claimed him 3 months past. The grief rose sudden and sharp, catching in her throat. "My name is Eleanor," she offered finally, deciding that partial truth served better than complete silence. "I was travelling to family in York when separated from my party." Gervais's eyes, grey as winter skies, met hers directly. "Separated or cast out, those bruises on your back came from no fall." The directness of his assessment startled her. "My circumstances are my own concern, sir." "As you wish, my lady." He turned his attention to her injured leg, examining it with clinical detachment. Nothing broken, but badly wrenched. You'll not walk easily for several days. The implication hung between them. She was stranded, dependent upon this stranger's uncertain charity. And where do you journey, Master Gervais, that brings you to this abandoned place? He rewrapped her leg in strips torn from a spare tunic before answering. North, beyond the borderlands. Fleeing something, she ventured, recognizing the wariness that mirrored her own. A log in the fire collapsed in a shower of sparks, illuminating a scar along his jawline that disappeared beneath his beard. Seeking something. The distinction matters little on the open road. Eleanor settled back, exhaustion overwhelming her desire for answers. The child within her stirred, a reassuring flutter that brought tears of relief to her eyes. Rest, Gervais said, misinterpreting her emotion. The storm rages still. We are safe enough here for the night. Safe, Eleanor thought bitterly, a word that had lost meaning the moment Philip had revealed his true nature. Yet as rain hammered against the lodge's timbers and the mysterious night moved quietly about their shelter, she found herself surrendering to an exhaustion too profound to resist, wondering, even as consciousness slipped away, what fate had delivered her from one danger only to place her in the hands of another, whose intentions remained as shrouded as the forest beyond the lodge walls. 3 days passed within the forest sanctuary, each dawn bringing fresh evidence of Eleanor's deteriorating condition. The child within her grew increasingly restless, sharp movements that once elicited smiles, now drawing gasps of pain. By the 4th morning, a persistent ache had settled in her lower back, radiating around her swollen belly with alarming frequency. Gervais returned from his morning hunt to find Eleanor pale-faced and breathing shallowly, her hands clutching at the makeshift bedding he had constructed from forest bracken and his cloak. "It comes too soon," she whispered, fear evident in eyes that had remained guarded even as they had begun to form a cautious alliance. Without comment, Gervais set aside the pair of rabbits he had snared and knelt beside her, pressing a weathered hand to her forehead. "Fever rises," he observed, his tone carefully neutral despite the concern that tightened his features. "Tell me true now, my lady, how far along is your condition?" 7 months, perhaps a little more. Eleanor closed her eyes as another wave of pain washed through her. "Thomas, my husband, counted the weeks most carefully after we learned of the child." The mention of her husband opened a door that had remained firmly closed since her arrival at the lodge. As Gervais bathed her face with cool water from a nearby stream, memories of Thomas flooded back with painful clarity. His proud smile when she told him of the child, his fevered last words extracting her promise to protect their lands for their unborn heir. "My husband's estates lie near Bedford," she found herself explaining, as the pain momentarily receded. "When fever took him 3 months past, his brother Philip became guardian of the lands until—" She gestured toward her belly. "Until a child arrives," Gervais finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "A son would inherit, displacing the brother." Eleanor nodded, wincing as another contraction gripped her. Philip's kindness lasted precisely as long as it took for the priest to read Thomas's will. "When he learned the lands would pass to me as regent until the child comes of age, his manner changed." She recalled with bitter clarity the transformation. Philip's solicitous concern giving way to thinly veiled contempt, then to blatant avarice as he offered to manage her inherited documents for safekeeping. "He said a woman in my delicate condition shouldn't burden herself with such matters," she continued, her hand moving instinctively to the leather pouch still secured at her waist. "When I refused, he insisted I accompany him to York, where he claimed Thomas had family. I knew it for a lie. My husband's only kin was Philip himself." Gervais listened in silence, preparing a tea from herbs he had gathered. The bitter brew had helped reduce her fever on previous nights. "And so he sought to be rid of you," he said finally, "sending your land claims with you into unmarked grave." "A tragic accident," Eleanor agreed, accepting the wooden cup with trembling hands. "A grieving widow, distraught with pregnancy humors, wandering from the wagon during a storm. Another pain seized her, more intense than the last, pulling a cry from her lips before she could suppress it. The cup tumbled from her fingers, spilling across the earthen floor. Gervais caught her shoulders as she doubled forward, his expression hardening into grim resolve. "The child comes," he said, reaching for his hunting knife to cut strips from his spare tunic, "and I am no midwife." Eleanor met his eyes, terror and desperate hope mingling in her gaze. "Then we are both at God's mercy now." Gervais stood at the threshold of the hunting lodge, torn between the safety of anonymity and the certain knowledge that Eleanor would not survive without more skilled help than he could provide. The contractions had grown more intense through the night, yet the child stubbornly refused to emerge. Eleanor's strength, remarkable as it had proven, was fading with each passing hour. "I must seek the village healer," he announced, buckling, his sword belt with decisive movements. "The hamlet of Woodbury lies half a league east, small enough that news travels slowly, large enough to have someone with midwifery skills." Eleanor's face, waxy with exhaustion, contorted as another spasm gripped her body. "They'll ask questions," she managed when the pain subsided, "about both of us." "Let them ask," Gervais replied, his tone suggesting the matter settled. "I've avoided human company for reasons that seem hollow when weighed against a woman and child's lives." The journey to Woodbury tested even his considerable woodcraft. Twice he was forced to conceal himself as mounted parties passed along the main road, Philip's men perhaps, or merely travelers, but he could risk neither discovery. By the time the thatched roofs of the village appeared through the trees, midday had passed, and urgency quickened his steps. Fortune favored him in the form of Agnes, a wiry woman of perhaps 50 winters, whom he discovered working her garden at the village edge. Years had passed since he'd last seen her, but the sharp eyes that assessed him showed immediate recognition. "The lost knight returns," she observed, rising from her herb beds with surprising agility. "7 years since you passed through these. Hearts, bearing a different name and wearing grander colors." "I bear the same name now as then," Gervais answered carefully, "though the colors were never mine by right." Agnes nodded, accepting this cryptic response with the pragmatism of one who had witnessed much of human folly. "And what brings Sir Gervais, or whatever name you now claim, to my garden gate with such desperation in his eyes?" His explanation tumbled forth with uncharacteristic urgency. The pregnant lady, the premature labor, his own inadequacy in matters of childbirth. Agnes listened without interruption, gathering herbs and supplies into a worn leather satchel even as he spoke. "A noble woman birthing in a hunter's lodge with only a disgraced knight for aid," she murmured, shaking her head. "The saints do love their little jests." "You remember too much," Gervais cautioned, as they hurried through the forest, his long strides matched by her determined pace. "And say too little, which is why you've brought me," Agnes countered. "I've kept many secrets through the years, including how the youngest son of Lord Radcliffe came to wear armor bearing the crest of Huntington." Gervais's jaw tightened. "That man is dead." "As you wish." At the lodge, Eleanor's condition had worsened. Her skin burned with fever, her eyes glazed with pain and confusion. Agnes took command with quiet authority, examining the laboring woman with practiced hands. "The child has shifted," she announced, preparing a strong-smelling infusion in the small cauldron Gervais had salvaged. "He fights to live, but comes too early and in the wrong position." Her shrewd gaze caught his. "You did right to fetch me, Sir Knight, though it cost your precious anonymity." Eleanor stirred at the unfamiliar voice, her fingers closing around Gervaise's rough hand with surprising strength. "The child," she whispered, "will have a fighting chance," Agnes assured her, guiding her to drink the bitter mixture. "As will you, my lady, though the night ahead brings a battle fiercer than any your knight has faced." Wind howled through the forest like a mournful spirit, driving rain against the lodge's weathered timbers as darkness descended. Inside, the small fire cast flickering shadows across Eleanor's pain-stricken face as she fought through another contraction. Agnes worked with methodical efficiency, her gnarled hands preparing poultices and tinctures between examinations of her patient. "The babe has turned somewhat," she announced after the latest assessment, "but still struggles against the natural." "A passage!" Gervais maintained his vigil near the doorway, sword across his knees, a warrior rendered useless by an enemy he could neither see nor fight. The women's domain of birth remained as foreign to him as court politics, yet he found himself unable to step outside, despite Agnes's hints that men typically awaited such events elsewhere. "Sir Knight," Agnes called suddenly, her voice cutting. Through Eleanor's agonized cry, "I require your hands now. Mine alone cannot manage what must be done." Startled from his thoughts, Gervais approached the makeshift birthing bed with uncharacteristic hesitation. Eleanor lay with knees drawn up, her shift soaked with sweat despite the night's chill. Her eyes, once guarded and suspicious, now sought his with desperate trust. "Do as Agnes instructs," she gasped, extending a trembling hand toward him. "Please." He knelt beside her, allowing her fingers to close around his calloused palm. 7. Years of exile had hardened him against many things, but the naked vulnerability in Eleanor's gaze pierced defenses long maintained. "The child must be guided," Agnes explained briskly, positioning his free hand at Eleanor's belly. "When the next pain comes, press here, firmly but steadily." What followed tested the limits of Gervais's battle-forged composure. Under Agnes's terse instruction, he applied pressure to turn the struggling infant, while Eleanor fought through contractions that left her gasping and weeping by turns. Hours blurred together, marked only by increasingly desperate prayers from Agnes and Eleanor's weakening cries. "I cannot," Eleanor whispered after a particularly brutal contraction left her trembling. "Thomas promised he would be here. He promised—" "Your husband walks with the angels," Agnes murmured, wiping Eleanor's brow with a damp cloth. "But you are not alone." Gervais found himself speaking, the words emerging unbidden. "Fight, my lady, like the warriors of old whose blood surely runs in your veins. Your child needs your strength now more than ever." Something in his voice seemed to reach. Eleanor's eyes focused on his face, drawing resolve from his unwavering gaze. When the next contraction came, she bore down with renewed determination, her hand crushing his with surprising strength. "The head crowns," Agnes announced. "Once more, child, the hardest push yet." Eleanor's scream tore through the lodge, rising above the storm's fury as she gave herself fully to the final terrible effort. And then, a different cry altogether, thin and indignant, the protest of new life thrust into the harsh light of existence. "A daughter," Agnes declared, efficiently clearing the infant's mouth and nose before wrapping her in clean linen. "Small, but strong-willed by the fight she gave us." The child, red-faced and impossibly tiny, was placed upon Eleanor's chest. Despite exhaustion etched in every line of her face, Eleanor's expression transformed with wonder as she traced a finger along her daughter's cheek. "Catherine," she whispered, tears mingling with sweat. "For my mother." Gervais remained kneeling beside them, suddenly aware that he still clasped Eleanor's hand in his own. When he moved to withdraw, her fingers tightened. "Stay," she murmured, her gaze never leaving the infant's face. "You helped bring her into this world. She is connected to you now, as am I." Agnes, busying herself with the afterbirth, glanced between them with knowing eyes. Bonds forged in blood and pain are not easily broken, she observed, be they forged in battle or birth. Outside, the storm began to subside, as if nature itself acknowledged that the night's most momentous struggle had reached its conclusion. 2 weeks after Catherine's birth, the abandoned hunting lodge had undergone a remarkable transformation. Fresh rushes covered the earthen floor, gathered by Gervais from the nearby meadow. The once bare walls now displayed bundles of drying herbs, Agnes's parting gift, along with stern instructions for their use. A crude table fashioned from fallen timber stood in one corner, bearing the small collection of possessions they had accumulated. A carved wooden bowl, 2 horn spoons, and a tiny cradle woven from supple willow branches. Eleanor sat in the patch of sunlight that streamed through the open doorway. Catherine nestled contentedly at her breast. The infant had flourished despite her early arrival, her determined grip on Eleanor's finger a testament to the strong will Agnes had predicted. Outside, summer had fully claimed the forest, clothing the ancient oaks in rich green and carpeting the clearings with wildflowers. "She has your look about her," Gervais observed, pausing in his task of cleaning rabbits from the morning's hunt. "The same way of studying the world, as if committing every detail to memory." Eleanor smiled, a gesture that came more easily now than in those first desperate days of their acquaintance. "Thomas always said I examined life too closely rather than simply living it." A shadow passed briefly across her features at the mention of her late husband, but lacked the sharp edge of earlier grief. Gervais's hands stilled, his gaze fixed on some middle distance beyond the lodge walls. He had grown increasingly withdrawn in recent days, as if the domesticity they had established awakened ghosts he had long kept at bay. "You knew Lord Radcliffe," Eleanor said, not a question but a gentle prompting. Agnes's parting words had revealed, more than perhaps intended, and the name had stirred recognition from Eleanor's memories of court gossip. "I served him," Gervais acknowledged after a lengthy silence, "for 7 years, from squire to knight." "Until you wore armor that wasn't yours," Eleanor added carefully, recalling Agnes's cryptic reference. The knife in Gervais's hand caught the sunlight as he set it aside, wiping bloodied fingers on a scrap of cloth with deliberate movements. "Until I refused an order that would have stained my soul beyond redemption." Catherine had drifted to sleep, her tiny face peaceful against Eleanor's chest. With practiced gentleness, she shifted the infant to her shoulder, waiting for Gervais to continue. "Lord Radcliffe's youngest son angered a powerful baron through an indiscreet liaison with his daughter," he finally said, voice distant as if recounting a tale heard long ago rather than lived. "Radcliffe commanded me to end the matter permanently. Not the son, who was blood, but the girl who bore evidence of their union." Eleanor's breath caught. "He ordered you to kill an innocent, a common-born girl of 16 summers, whose only crime was loving unwisely." Gervais's expression hardened. "I refused. More than refused. I warned her, helped her flee to sanctuary at Tewkesbury Abbey." "A noble choice," Eleanor observed softly, "a costly one. Radcliffe branded me oathbreaker, stripped me of title and lands." His hand moved unconsciously to the scar along his jawline. "His men-at-arms left this as reminder before I escaped. I've wandered since, taking what work a sword arm can find, avoiding those who might recognize the disgraced knight who once stood in Radcliffe's favor." Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. "This is why you hesitated to seek Agnes's help, why you've avoided villages and kept to the forest paths." Gervais nodded. "Radcliffe's influence stretches far. The penalty for my defiance remains death should I be discovered." Catherine stirred against Eleanor's shoulder, tiny fingers flexing in sleep. "We are both exiles then," she mused, "cast out for standing against powerful men's avarice." After a thoughtful pause, she added, Though your exile carries more honor than mine, there is no honor in being hunted, Gervase countered, though something in his posture had eased with the unburdening of his secret. Is there not? Eleanor's gaze held his steadily. I think the girl whose life you saved would disagree. The stream gurgled pleasantly as Eleanor knelt at its edge, scrubbing linens against a smooth stone. Catherine lay nearby on a bed of moss, sheltered from the summer sun by a canopy of willow branches. 3 weeks had passed since her birth, each day bringing new strength to both mother and child. Eleanor's hands had grown calloused from unaccustomed labor, yet she took quiet pride in these marks of survival. A rustle in the undergrowth caused her to freeze mid-motion, water dripping from the half-washed cloth. She relaxed only when Gervase emerged from the forest path, though the tension in his posture immediately rekindled her alarm. Someone approaches the lodge, he said without preamble, voice pitched low. A single traveller from the direction of Woodbury. Eleanor gathered Catherine to her chest, the peaceful moment shattered. Philip's men? Unlikely. He moves with purpose, but not stealth, no armor that I could discern. Gervase's hand rested on his sword hilt nonetheless. Wait here. I'll discover his business. Eleanor watched him disappear along the path, fear knotting in her stomach. The forest, once a sanctuary, suddenly seemed filled with hidden threats. Catherine sensed her mother's anxiety, small face scrunching in protest. Hush, little one, Eleanor murmured, rocking gently. All will be well. The reassurance rang hollow even to her own ears. Philip was not a man to surrender valuable property easily. That he had not immediately returned with more men to search for her body suggested he believed her truly dead, or wished others to believe so. Either possibility offered scant comfort. Nearly an hour passed before Gervase returned, accompanied by a gaunt young man Eleanor recognized as Agnes's apprentice, Watt. The boy's face was drawn with exhaustion, his clothing bearing evidence of hard travel. My mistress bade me find you with all haste, Watt explained once they had returned to the lodge. Armed men came to Woodbury yestereve, bearing the livery of Lord Philip Montfort. They sought word of a noblewoman and her newborn child. Ice flooded Eleanor's veins. Did they discover anything of us? Watt shook his head. Agnes sent them astray with tales of a merchant's widow who passed through toward Lincoln weeks ago, but they were most persistent, offering silver for any information. His eyes darted nervously to the door. One spoke of searching abandoned dwellings in the forest. They mentioned this hunting lodge specifically. How soon? Gervase demanded, already moving to gather their meager possessions. They rode out at first light, Watt replied. Following the main road, they would reach the western forest paths by midday. Sunlight slanting through the doorway confirmed the hour, past noon already. Whatever head start they might have had was rapidly diminishing. We must leave immediately, Gervase decided, securing his sword belt with practiced efficiency. The northern paths are less traveled. If we move quickly, we can reach the old monastery ruins by nightfall. Eleanor clutched Catherine closer, mind racing through limited options. And then, winter comes early to the northern reaches. We cannot live in ruins with an infant. Gervase paused in his preparations, eyes meeting hers directly. My original journey was bound for Scotland. The border lords care little for English quarrels. A skilled sword arm finds ready employment, and no one questions a man's past too closely. The proposal hung between them, not merely a temporary flight, but a complete abandonment of the life Eleanor had known. Yet what truly remained for her in England? Philip would never cease hunting her while the land deed threatened his claim. Every town, every village harbored potential informants willing to trade her safety for coin. Catherine stirred in her arms, a reminder of what truly mattered now. How soon can we depart? Relief flickered across Gervase's weathered features. Within the hour, take only what can be easily carried. As Eleanor gathered what necessities she could for Catherine, a cold resolution settled in her heart. Philip had sought to bury her once in an unmarked grave. Now she would disappear by choice, becoming a ghost to reclaim her life and her daughter's future. Outside, a distant shout carried through the summer air, too far to discern words, but unmistakably human. Gervaise's head snapped up, hand flying to his weapon. "They come," he said grimly, "and faster than we feared." 5 days of hard travel had carried them beyond the hunting forests and into the wilder northern territories. The rough track they followed now had once been a Roman road, its ancient stones still visible in places beneath centuries of encroaching nature. They moved as common folk, Gervais having traded his sword for a woodsman's axe slung across his shoulder, Eleanor wearing a simple homespun kirtle that Agnes had provided, Catherine bundled against her chest in a linen sling. The disguise had proven effective in the 2 small villages they had passed through. In a war-weary land accustomed to displaced families, a carpenter and his wife, traveling north with their infant daughter, drew little attention. Coin from the sale of Gervaise's fine dagger had purchased a sturdy mule, easing Eleanor's burden and hastening their pace. As dusk approached on the 5th day, they made camp in a sheltered hollow near a stand of birch trees. The summer air carried a hint of autumn's chill, a reminder of the season's inevitable turn. While Gervais busied himself building a small fire, Eleanor nursed Catherine, marveling as always at the infant's vigor despite the circumstances of her birth and flight. "She grows stronger each day," Gervais observed, his voice softened in the manner that emerged only when he spoke of the child. "A determined spirit, like her mother." Eleanor smiled, the gesture coming more naturally now than in the tense days, following their escape from the lodge. Or perhaps like her protector, who refuses to yield even when the odds stand against him. A comfortable silence settled between them as the fire took hold, casting warm light against the gathering shadows. Such quiet moments had become increasingly precious, islands of peace in their urgent journey. "We cross into Northumbria tomorrow," Gervais said finally, accepting a portion of the hard bread and cheese that constituted their evening meal. "The borderlands lie 3 days beyond, if the weather holds." Eleanor's fingers strayed to the leather pouch that remained secured at her waist, despite all their travels. Within it lay not only Thomas's land deed, but a secret she had guarded, even from the man who had twice saved her life. "There is something you should know," she began, her voice steady despite the apprehension coiling in her chest. "Something I have not told you about my past, about my family." Gervais's expression remained open, patient. In the firelight, the scar along his jawline stood out in sharp relief, a reminder of the price he had paid for his own principles. "My husband knew me as Eleanor of Bedford, orphaned niece to the old baron," she continued. "It was a convenient fiction, one that allowed a political arrangement without raising questions about northern allegiances during these troubled times." Understanding dawned gradually in Gervais's eyes. "You are not from Bedford at all." Eleanor shook her head. "My true father is Lord William Armstrong, Warden of the Middle March. I was sent south at 16 as part of an arrangement to secure peace between our houses. Thomas knew the truth, though few others did." "Armstrong," Gervais repeated, recognition evident in his tone, "a powerful name in the borderlands, and far beyond Philip Montfort's reach." "Yes." Eleanor shifted Catherine to her shoulder, the child now drowsy with contentment. "My father's holdings lie near Alnwick Castle. If we could reach his protection, then Philip's claims would mean nothing," Gervais finished. "A Northumbrian lord would laugh at demands from a minor southern baron, especially concerning his own daughter and grandchild." Eleanor studied his face in the flickering light, searching for any sign of the calculation or advantage-seeking that had characterized her dealings with men since Thomas's death. She found only thoughtful consideration. "Why tell me this now?" he asked finally. "We've traveled together these many weeks. Because tomorrow we enter the Northern Territories, where my father's name carries weight," she answered honestly. "And because you have earned more than the half-truths I've offered. You've protected Catherine and me without question, risking your own safety for ours." Her voice softened. "And because I believe you deserve to know whom you truly serve, Sir Gervais." The formality of his title, unused between them since their first meeting, hung in the night air, not a barrier now, but an acknowledgement of the knight he remained despite his circumstances. "I serve no lord or lady," he replied, eyes holding hers steadily across the fire, "but I would gladly stand as protector to a friend." The simple declaration, free from obligation or advantage, touched Eleanor more deeply than grand oaths ever could. Catherine sighed in her sleep, one tiny hand curled against her mother's neck, as if affirming the trust newly established between her guardians. Then, as a friend, Eleanor said softly, "I ask your counsel on our path ahead." The narrow pass cut between weathered hills like a scar across the landscape, its steep walls funneling travellers along a path barely wide enough for a loaded cart. Eleanor eyed the terrain with growing unease as they entered the shadowed corridor shortly after. Midday. Catherine, secured against her chest, sensed her mother's tension and fussed quietly. "I mislike this place," she murmured to Gervais, who led their mule with watchful attention, too easily blocked at either end. "Aye," he acknowledged, eyes scanning the ridge above them. "But the alternative adds 2 days to our journey, and rain threatens from the west." They had made good progress in the 3 days since Eleanor had revealed her true heritage, covering ground more quickly than expected. The borderlands now lay less than a day's journey ahead, and with them, the promise of safety within her. "Father's territories. We'll camp beyond the pass," Gervais decided as afternoon shadows lengthened. "Make the border crossing with daylight tomorrow." Night fell with unsettling swiftness in the narrow valley they selected for their camp. Eleanor had just settled Catherine after nursing when Gervais suddenly stiffened, hand moving to the woodsman's axe that concealed his true nature. "Douse the fire," he ordered quietly, rising in a fluid motion that belied his apparent relaxation of moments before. Eleanor moved without question, smothering the small flames with earth while straining to detect whatever had alarmed her companion. Then she heard it, the muffled clink of metal against metal, the soft whisper of leather on stone, not the sounds of forest creatures but of men attempting stealth. "Behind the rocks," Gervais directed, nodding toward a tumble of boulders at the valley's edge. "Take Catherine and stay hidden, no matter what occurs." "How many?" she whispered, gathering her daughter close. 5, perhaps 6, too many for coincidence. His expression hardened as he reached beneath their pack, withdrawing the sword he had kept concealed throughout their journey. "Go, now." Eleanor crouched behind the boulders, heart hammering against her ribs as Catherine mercifully remained silent in her arms. From her position, she could see Gervais standing seemingly alone beside their doused campfire, sword now visible in the moonlight. "Show yourselves," he called, voice carrying easily in the night air. "This game grows tiresome." Figures emerged from the shadows, 4 men in mail and leather, bearing the distinctive livery of Montfort. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute, with a pockmarked face, stepped forward with unpleasant confidence. "The woman and child," he demanded without preamble. "Lord Philip desires their immediate return to his protection." "There is no woman here," Gervais replied evenly. "Only a weary traveller who suggests you seek elsewhere." The leader spat contemptuously. "The innkeeper at Carford remembered a carpenter, travelling with wife and babe, described you most particularly." His hand moved to his sword hilt. "We've tracked you 3 days. Our patience ends tonight. What followed unfolded with breathtaking savagery. As the first man lunged, Gervais moved with the economical grace of one born to combat. His blade caught moonlight as it arced through the air, finding the gap between gorget and helm with lethal precision. Before the first attacker crumpled, Gervais had already pivoted to meet the second. Two men circled behind him, clearly intent on flanking the lone defender. Their path would take them perilously close to Eleanor's hiding place. Desperately, she searched the ground near her feet, fingers closing around a fist-sized stone, as Catherine stirred against her shoulder. One man fell to Gervais's blade, even as the other two closed on his position. Eleanor emerged from concealment, hurling the stone with all her strength at the nearer attacker. It struck his temple with an audible crack, staggering him long enough for Gervais to dispatch his immediate opponent. "Run!" Gervais shouted, blood streaming from a cut above his eye as he turned to face the remaining men. Instead, Eleanor snatched up a fallen dagger, her free arm cradling Catherine protectively against her chest. When the final attacker, seeing his companions fallen, turned to flee, she stepped directly into his path. "Tell Philip that Eleanor Montfort died in that ravine," she commanded, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Tell him the child perished with her mother. If he values his life, he will believe it so." The man's eyes widened with superstitious fear. A noblewoman risen from the grave, infant in arm, blood-splattered guardian at her back. Whatever courage had sustained him dissolved as he scrambled backward, then turned to flee into the darkness. Gervais lowered his sword, breathing heavily as he moved to Eleanor's side. "You should have run," he admonished, though admiration tempered his reproach. Eleanor looked down at Catherine, who had somehow slept through the entire violent encounter. "I'm tired of running," she answered quietly, "and weary of men who believe me defenseless." Blood from the cut above his eye traced the line of Gervais's scar as he surveyed the fallen attackers. "They'll send more when this party fails to return. Then we must reach my father's lands before they do." Eleanor lifted her gaze to the northern horizon, where dawn would eventually break. "We ride tonight." The borderlands stretched before them like a patchwork quilt, rolling hills dotted with stands of ancient oak, narrow streams cutting silver paths across valleys where sheep grazed under the watchful eyes of stone-faced shepherds. After 2 days of hard riding, they had reached the territories where Eleanor's father's name carried weight. The Armstrong banner, a mailed fist grasping a curved blade, flew from a watchtower visible on the distant ridge. "My father's border guards," Eleanor explained, nodding toward mounted figures patrolling the hillside. "Once we cross into their territory, Philip's men would not dare follow." Catherine, strapped securely to Eleanor's chest, had weathered their urgent journey with remarkable resilience. Gervais rode slightly ahead, his posture alert, despite the evident exhaustion that shadowed his features. The cut above his eye had scabbed over, joining the older scar along his jawline like a warrior's tally marks. They stopped to water their mounts at a stream marking the unofficial boundary. While Eleanor attended to Catherine, Gervais stood apart, gaze fixed on the northern horizon with an expression she couldn't immediately decipher. "By nightfall, you'll sleep under your father's roof," he said when she approached, his tone carefully neutral. "Safe from Philip and his schemes." "We both will," Eleanor corrected, noting his subtle use of you rather than we. When he didn't immediately respond, understanding dawned. "You're considering leaving." Gervais turned to face her fully, his weathered features set in lines of resignation. "A disgraced knight makes poor company for a noble lady returning to her family's embrace after everything we've endured together." Eleanor fought to keep incredulity from her voice. "You would simply disappear once we reach safety." "I would spare you complications," he countered. "Lord Armstrong will have questions about the man who arrives with his daughter." questions I cannot answer without revealing my true identity, and the charges that hang over me. Then answer truly, Eleanor said, shifting Catherine as the infant began to fuss. My father values honor above politics. He would understand your choice, as I do. Gervaise's hand moved unconsciously to the scar along his jaw. Men of power rarely appreciate those who defy authority, even for righteous cause. You know nothing of my father, Eleanor challenged, frustration lending heat to her words, just as Philip knew nothing of me when he assumed I would meekly accept whatever fate he ordained. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Gervaise's features. I meant no offense. Yet you would abandon Catherine and me at the final threshold, she pressed, after standing as our protector through far greater dangers. Not abandon, he corrected softly. Release. You return to your rightful place, a world where knights, without land or title, serve at best as hired swords, at worst as cautionary tales. Eleanor studied his face, recognizing the pride that had sustained him through 7 years of exile, a pride that would not allow him to appear diminished before noble eyes, even for her sake. Before she could formulate a response, movement on the ridge caught her attention. 4 riders descended the hillside at a canter, the distinctive Armstrong colors now clearly visible on their surcoats. The border patrol had spotted them. Whatever you decide, Eleanor said urgently, know that Catherine and I owe you a debt beyond measure. My father will honor that debt regardless of your past. The approaching riders slowed as they recognized a woman and child among the travelers. Their leader, a grizzled man with the hard eyes of a career soldier, raised a hand in greeting tinged with suspicion. You enter Armstrong lands, he called. State your business and allegiance. Eleanor stepped forward, drawing herself to her, at full height, despite travel-worn garments and the infant secured at her breast. I am Eleanor Armstrong, daughter of Lord William, returned from the south with my child. Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of noble birth. This man is my protector and honored companion. We seek immediate escort to my father's keep. The patrol leader's expression shifted from suspicion to astonishment. Lady Eleanor, we believed you dead these 3 months past. Word came from Bedford that I perished in childbirth. She finished for him, a convenient tale spread by those who wished to claim what was not theirs. She gestured toward Gervaise, who had remained carefully neutral throughout the exchange. Without this man's courage, it would have been truth rather than deception. The guard captain studied Gervais with newly appreciative eyes. Then he has earned Lord Armstrong's gratitude, as well as yours. He gestured to his men. We'll provide escort immediately. The Lord will want to see his daughter without delay. As the border guards prepared to accompany them to the keep, Eleanor moved close to Gervais, her voice pitched for his ears alone. The choice remains yours, she said quietly. But know that in my father's hall you would be welcomed not as a disgraced knight, but as the man who saved his daughter and grandchild from certain death. For the first time since she had known him, uncertainty showed plainly on Gervaise's face, the expression of a man standing at a crossroads as momentous as the one that had led to his exile 7 years before. Armstrong Castle stood defiant against the northern sky, its grey stone towers rising from the hillside like ancient guardians. Within its walls, life had resumed rhythms nearly forgotten during Eleanor's long exile. The comfort of servants anticipating needs before they arose, the security of thick walls and vigilant guards, the luxury of clean linens and regular meals. 3 months had passed since their arrival, winter settling across the borderlands in a blanket of pristine white. In the great hall, Lord William Armstrong sat beside the massive hearth, Catherine cradled in his arms with surprising tenderness. For a man known throughout the North for his iron resolve, the infant, now thriving despite her difficult entry into the world, had enchanted her grandfather from their first meeting. She has the Armstrong eyes, he observed, not for the first time, as Eleanor joined them by the fire. "And her mother's spirit, if her determination to grab my beard is any indication." Eleanor smiled, watching her father with her daughter, a sight she had feared she might never witness during those desperate days in the forest. Catherine knows a worthy ally when she sees one. The sound of men training echoed from the courtyard below, the rhythmic clash of practice swords against shields, the occasional shout of instruction or approval. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window, where Gervaise's distinctive figure was visible among the castle guards, demonstrating sword techniques to younger recruits. Lord William followed her glance, his weathered features softening with understanding. "He's proven himself thrice over since your return," he remarked, surprising Eleanor with his perception. "Not just in the tale you've told, but in his conduct here. The men respect him, despite, or perhaps because of, his unusual path." The story of Gervaise's disgrace and exile had emerged gradually over their first weeks at Armstrong Castle. Rather than the condemnation Gervaise had feared, Lord William had responded with measured approval of a man who placed conscience above convenience. "Most lords would have carried out Radcliffe's command without question," he had observed upon hearing the full account. "Easier to bloody one's hands than risk one's position. It takes rare courage to choose differently." Now, watching Gervaise from the window, Eleanor considered how completely circumstances had transformed them both. She was no longer the sheltered, noble bride sent south for political alliance, just as he was no longer the bitter exile avoiding human connection. "I've made a decision regarding Sir Gervais," Lord William announced, breaking into her thoughts. "I'm offering him permanent position as Master-at-Arms, with lands fitting his station." Eleanor turned from the window, carefully controlling her expression. "And has he accepted?" "He requested time to consider," her father replied. A knowing gleam in his eye said there were matters he must resolve before committing to service. The winter afternoon waned toward evening, as Eleanor waited in the small garden courtyard where spring flowers lay dormant beneath the snow. The space, sheltered from bitter winds by the castle walls, had become a favored meeting place when privacy was desired. Gervais arrived as the last light faded, snowflakes catching in his dark hair and beard. The months in Armstrong Castle had restored some of the polish worn away by years of wandering, though the essential strength that had sustained him through exile remained undiminished. "Your father is a generous man," he began without preamble. "The position he offers exceeds what any disgraced knight might reasonably expect." "My father recognizes quality of character," Eleanor replied. "As do I." Gervaise's expression remained carefully neutral. "And there are those who would question his judgment, a border lord placing trust in a man who defied his previous master." "There are always those who question," Eleanor countered, moving closer. "Just as there are always those who abandon pregnant women on forest roads, assuming them too weak to survive. Let them question. We know the truth of who we are." Something in Gervaise's controlled demeanor shifted, vulnerability briefly visible beneath the warrior's composure. "And who are we, Eleanor? A noble woman and a landless knight, the lady of the castle and her master-at-arms. We are those who found each other when all hope seemed lost," she answered simply. "A man of conscience and a woman who refused to surrender. Catherine's protectors. The rest," she gestured toward the dormant garden. "The rest can grow as spring returns if we have courage to nurture it." Gervaise's hand moved to cup her cheek, the calluses earned through years of swordplay rough against her skin. "I've accepted your father's offer," he said quietly, "not for the position or lands, but for the chance to remain near you and Catherine, to see what might grow between us, if given proper season." Eleanor covered his hand with her own, feeling the scars and strength that had carried them both through darkness to this unexpected future. Beyond the garden walls, winter held the borderlands in its grip, and challenges undoubtedly awaited. Philip's continued schemes, Radcliffe's unresolved vengeance, the complexities of forging connection across boundaries of rank and circumstance. Yet, as Gervaise's arms encircled her, Eleanor found herself focusing not on dangers past or trials ahead, but on the present moment. The warmth of shared purpose, the certainty that whatever paths opened before them, they would walk them side by side. Just as they had journeyed, from that rain-lashed ravine where fate had first entwined their lives, through forest and danger, to this sanctuary where new beginnings waited to unfold with the coming spring.